This is Thursday, March 10th, and I wanted to just show off some of my progress on my game. And I finished some of the core mechanics as you can see here, we have a blue line showing that there's flow of resources into this object. And when this object gets enough resources to build the next component, that line turns blue. So here in this case, when these turn 20, this pipeline will become blue, and then the next level, it indicates that it turns blue because it's now got enough resources to create at least one item. What I don't have yet is if I click here, I can add an item, but it doesn't subtract from this yet. So I'm still working on that. But as you can see here, for instance, if you click, you add resources, these remain gray because there's no actual flow into those resources. So when the game comes up, when you click here, I believe I'm thinking about making this cost money. So like you can bypass the development process by just going ahead and buying a particular resource, or you can invest in an upgrade, and this is just a debugging bug right now. But if you click an achievement, or not an achievement, but if you click on a upgrade resource, for instance, this adds 0.2 to the flow, which now means that we're going to get a resource every 5 seconds. And you'll notice that these have now turned blue because they have resources flowing into them. And now that we passed 5, that turns blue. When this AL resource passes 10, it will turn blue. And then when this one turns 20, it will turn blue. And as soon as that turns blue, then we can build. And in the actual game, you won't be able to click on these. These will, well, actually, when you click on these, then it's going to subtract those resources down here. So I still have to work on that. And we also have to connect the power, because you're going to need to have power into it. But right now, that's not working. So you can just add it here. And then once you build something, the widgets are going to come out on a conveyor belt. And then you're just going to stockpile these things, and then there's going to be a market mechanism that will allow you to sell them to get more money, and the market mechanism will go up and down, so you'll never know how much. Sometimes you'll get better prices than others. And anyway, next steps are. I also have this news feed that's going to have a storyline that's going to just be in the background. A good portion of this game is meant to be strategic and self-playing. So once, for instance, you have the flow going through all of these different elements, you could actually set it up so that it runs on its own. And then you'll get achievements for different goals and increasing productivity. Over on this section is where the over in this section is where the buildings and upgrades are going to be kept. And one of the big challenges that I had so far was that my original concept, which I have this H2O test here. As you can see, I built it to work in some of this in the same way. The biggest difference was that I hard-coded everything in here, so I had all my hydrogen code on the hydrogen button, all the oxygen code on here, and all the H2O, which was completely different because these just had to manage an input, whereas this has to manage not only an output but also the flow in from two different resources instead of one, and so the code was very different. The biggest difference is that when I created this portion, I wanted it to be run by the same code, and so I actually have a master. I have one resource code that handles all these situations. So, I put these into an array, and based upon the information in the array, the buttons are located and act differently based upon that programmatic approach. It works really well for the most part. I think there's still a lot of optimization that I can do, because the goal is to get this to a point where I can just add resources. So for instance, later on, I might have like 1 to 5 resources that feed into each of these. At this point, it's relatively easy to update, but I think it could be easier, because I think there's still some areas that, possibly instead of using a 2D array, I probably should have used instead of using a series of arrays, I probably should have used a 2D array or perhaps a grid, so that I could actually get some additional functionality. But right now, I've got a lot of it worked. The next steps are going to be to get it so that whenever I create a new item, it will subtract the required resources. For testing purposes, I have it. The resource on the left requires 5, or the laser, for instance, requires 5 of this, 10 of this, and 20 of this. And also you'll notice that all the flow has turned to 0. I have to update it so that this turns to gray again. Now there's still a flow value. That didn't change. There's just logic saying that when you're to capacity, because right now there's only capacity for 20 items, and when you get to capacity, then the flow stops. So for instance, when you purchase, or whenever you have enough resources to build the battery, for instance, it's going to take the corresponding amount of items from each of these, and then the flow will start back up again, and then the capacity will fill. So some of the upgrades that you will be able to purchase will be to upgrade the capacity. You can upgrade the flow, and then you can upgrade, which will upgrade the speed, and then you can also upgrade efficiency. So for instance, perhaps the AC takes 5, or let's say we start out with 20. It takes 20 to build one battery, but you could create an efficiency that's like, now it only takes 17 to build it, or only 10, or it could get down to 1. So once you've invested enough into your resources and upgrades, this process could flow pretty quickly, and you could start seeing a lot of production. But it's going to start out where it's going to take quite a while when the game mechanics are working correctly. It'll take quite a while to make that first one, and then the second one will be a little faster, and so on and so forth. And then once you start selling and building your production line, the idea is that this will actually flow pretty nicely. And I'm thinking of having, when I get the mechanics working, I'm thinking of having some little moving animations to make it a bit more interesting. But that's where I am right now.